Sanders worked at multiple TV networks. He worked, I think, at CBS, NFL Network. I understand that. A lot of people at that NFL Network building know Deion. But it is our job as broadcasters to cut through that and be honest with the audience. And I'm not going to call out anybody individually, but I thought it was really strange that all the draft coverage that I saw, as everybody was shocked, dismayed that Shedeur Sanders had fallen in the draft, nobody said, even mentioned, that maybe dad didn't help him out. I know a lot of people know Deion Sanders and like him. But go back to January. Go back to the Super Bowl week when Deion is on multiple shows. It wasn't until mid-March when Deion, probably somebody got into his ear. Or maybe he came to his senses, where Deion Sanders said, okay, my son can be drafted by anybody. Until that point, during key evaluation months, go to the Super Bowl. Look it up. I went this morning and looked at clips, found 4 different shows of Deion Sanders with arrogance, hubris, confidence, saying, hey, it's going to be on our terms. There are teams he will not be playing for. Now, time out. He wasn't directing that at Andy Reid and the Chiefs, Sean McDermott in the Bills. He wasn't directing that at well-run teams with star quarterbacks. He was specifically directing that at these 7 or 8 teams, and that's about the only teams that need a quarterback. 7 or 8 teams that needed a quarterback, many of them struggling franchises. And he, in interview after interview publicly, was going out saying, again, with great confidence, I know the game. I know what's behind the curtain. We're not going to play for certain teams. Okay, so Shedeur is not that great of a prospect. This draft class, quarterback class, is so weak that Cam Ward is in line with Bo Nix. Okay, Bo Nix went to the Broncos. You want to know who was drafted ahead of him? Lots of people. Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix. Okay, so Shedeur Sanders as a prospect is below, and many people believe far below, Cam Ward. Many believe he's also behind Jackson Dart, the Giants did. Whether you agree with that or not, this is not a John Elway. This is not an Andrew Luck. This is not even a Caleb Williams prospect where you're going to overlook some stuff, right? And so just let's go back to this. Shedeur is a prospect. He's going to be an employee of a business. And your dad is saying, there are teams we will not play for. And that's directed at many of the teams that were interested. It wasn't directed at the best teams in the league. And nobody wants to just note that, acknowledge that, mention that. You know, I've said on my show before, quarterback dad has become pageant mom, where the heart is in the right place, but sometimes they do a disservice to their kids. We saw this with Nico Iamaleava, the quarterback for Tennessee. Great program. Dad stepped in. Son didn't show up to a spring practice. We're out of here. And he had no market. UCLA has one of the smallest NILs in the Big Ten. The kid reportedly took a pay cut to live in a much more expensive city and go to a much less storied football program. Quarterback dad. So college football sent a message. It wasn't collusion. People weren't on the phone. And this is not collusion. Remember, only 7 or 8 teams needed a quarterback. And I could argue only 2 teams needed a starting quarterback, Tennessee and Pittsburgh, unless the Steelers have some Aaron Rodgers deal agreed to. But I understand people being turned off. And then this has to be acknowledged too, as people at these networks doing the draft are not mentioning this. He not only interviewed poorly, Todd McShay on his podcast for The Ringer acknowledged he named a name. Brian Daboll brought him in. Shedeur Sanders wasn't prepared on the whiteboard. When he called him out, Shedeur Sanders didn't take it well. So you may not like that there was anonymous coaches saying it was the worst interview ever. I can understand if you don't like that. That feels a little harsh. I get that. However, that doesn't make it untrue. There are multiple reports now, multiple teams that did not feel that Shedeur was engaged, that Shedeur made people feel small. It's okay to mention that stuff. So again, the greater the prospect, the more flaws you can have. And quarterback's different. You know, throughout the years, I talked to a lot of people in the league. Of all the sports I cover, I have far more NFL sources, mostly because that's your favorite sport and it drives a number. But when I talk to scouts and executives about football players, they talk about skill and talent and toughness. When I talk to executives about quarterbacks, the conversation changes. It's about leadership and focus, the ability to cognitively get up to speed, read a defense, totally different conversation. Everything's different for quarterbacks. That's why I was so tough on Johnny Manziel and Baker Mayfield on maturity. I didn't care if they were a Mike linebacker, a right guard. When you're a quarterback, the conversation changes. You know, you need a lot of things from a quarterback that you don't need from other players. Maturity, focus, what really matters. You have to love football. I've been critical of Trevor Lawrence, who has said before, football doesn't define me. Well, people are looking for quarterbacks where football defines them. They want you to be obsessed. They want you to be Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. I'm sorry, they do. I didn't make the rules up. So I just thought it's a bit disingenuous to not mention the fact that football dad Deion was setting parameters up directed at the teams that were going to draft his son, which I think was a big turnoff. You know, I've had NFL people say this before. We're not the NBA. We don't do load management. It's like no. NBA's got its own culture. That's not our culture. And college football sent that message to Nico Iamaleava. And I think some of this was, hey man, listen, no parameters. You got to interview better. And I said this on the air Friday, I didn't love, your draft room with legendary posted all over it. A little cringy. The New York Giant cleats, a little cringy. Not the end of the world, not everything, a little something. But, you have to be like, when people are texting me that are not in football or don't cover football, and they're sending legitimate and very obvious questions about the Deion, kindly either acknowledge or infer that his son would be okay being drafted by anybody. But to me, a lot of the damage had been done in January and February and the Super Bowl week and early March. A lot of people were turned off. So I think that's part of it. I think there are messages being sent. It's not collusion. I mean, if Pete Carroll and Mike Tomlin both pass on him, Tomlin needs a starter, and Pete could use a backup. They are both player friendly. They have both been coaches willing to draft players where there's a little bit of noise around them, and they passed. The Shedeur stuff, obviously,